I'm Sarah Martin, a board director with the Press Club and a political reporter at the Australian newspaper. This is the first address I've moderated for the club, and as such they thought it best to give me a safe option, someone entirely predictable and mild-mannered. So today, as we begin our series of leaders' election addresses, we are joined by the Leader of the National Party and Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce. And good news, there are fewer than 10 days until polls open on July 2. Mr Joyce has been described variously as the best retail politician in Australia and as a distant relative to a tomato, we assume from SPC Ardmona. In this election, he's in a fierce contest in his seat of New England against independent Tony Windsor, and we thank him for taking time out from the campaign to join us here today. For those on Twitter, please follow today's address using #NPC, and please welcome the Leader of the National Party, Barnaby Joyce.
Well, thank you very much for that, Sarah. I'd like to acknowledge my deputy, Fiona Nash, who's here today. I better get the order right. I'd like to acknowledge my wife, who won't be here today if I don't acknowledge her. To the Secretary of my department, Daryl Quinlivan, to so many of my friends and colleagues around the room, and also to Simon Southwell, because he's just there. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of the Nationals is by its very nature created by the places we live in. It is away from the massive investments that have happened in certain distinct geographic areas over hundreds of years. We do not begrudge the massive public largesse that resides in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane or Canberra, but our whole political purpose is to stand up for those who live elsewhere. Because they live elsewhere, they start with less. They don't live near the multiple hospitals, the multiple highways, the multiple sporting venues, the multiple recreational venues. But from the roofs of the houses of these cities, you could possibly see many of these. Because they start without the magnitude of the benefaction that you see in the centre of the city, we are there to fight for the purpose of making sure that they at least get comparable services. Over the last 3 years, our strong Nationals team has been proud to stand up for regional Australia, from Michelle Landry in Capricornia to Kenny O'Dowd and Flynn to Kevin Hogan in the seat of Page. Our champions stand up and fight for their local communities. In our work with our Liberal Party partners, we led to the debate that removed the carbon tax. Why? Because the people who the carbon tax hurt were the poorest people, and we are proud to represent those people who do it harder than others, or live more remoter than others. We worked as well to remove the mining tax, because where you find coal, and where you will find miners, and iron ore miners, and bauxite miners, and prospectors. And where do these people live? Well, they live in regional areas, and they were supported by the mining industry. The Nationals are also the party of small business, people who understand what it's like to take a risk and invest in the community and employ local people. People like Damien Drum in the electorate of Murray, and Marty Corboy in the electorate of Indi, Matthew Fraser in Richmond, people who come from humble beginnings but took a risk in business. We have built our businesses so we understand that you need to work hard to build the foundations to create prosperous regions. The National Party heritage is based on farmers, and we continue to fight as the core of our religion for their rights. This is no better manifested than in the fact that we hold the portfolio of agriculture and water resources at the Deputy Prime Ministers. It is fair to say that the role of agriculture is sadly forgotten by the alternative government in this election. They don't take seriously what is now the second largest export of our nation, agricultural exports, after iron ore. But we have worked to deliver 3 free trade agreements, and we have been resilient in making sure that we grow the live export industry. We fought hard to deliver on a $4 billion agricultural white paper when the alternative was a $30 million Labor Party food plan. We've stood for the rights of farmers in conflicts on land use agreements. We fight for farmers because they so often epitomise the weaker party, and the National Party will always be standing with the underdog. As a government, we stopped the people smugglers of the Labor Green Independent Alliance's chaotic border policy. Not only was it chaotic, It was responsible for the death of 1,200 men, women and children. Men, women and children who had escaped the clutches of criminals but have paid for it with their lives. We are not an ungenerous country. We are not inhumane. We pride ourselves on compassion, but it must be compassion on the premise of order and under the necessity of strict controls. So it is clear that we stand for the underdog. We stand for regional areas. We believe in compassion, and we work within government because we believe in order. Our dream, therefore, in this 100-year-old party that is the Nationals, is that an individual, although they may not be born with the same wallet, or the same education, or the same genealogy of a more fortunate family, that person can start from nowhere and with nothing more than their enthusiasm, their discipline, and the sweat of their own brow transcend through the social and economic stratification of life to the highest levels of their innate abilities. This is not a selfish purpose, because that person, in doing so, will take other people and their community with them. When an Aboriginal live cattle producer builds a successful business in the export of beef, he takes his community with him. When a migrant comes from overseas and starts her business in a regional town, and it grows and it flourishes, she takes her community with her. When a kid from out west goes to university, maybe the first in their family to do so, they show to others the opportunities that are available within this nation. Our job in the Nationals is to remove the impediments that exist between the individual's capacity to transcend the social and economic stratification of life and this incredible country we live in. How do we do this? Well, one item is no better encapsulated than in the effects test. That said, small businesses will have greater rights in the marketplace when they can exist and deal with the perverse actions of large operators who challenge you and push you out. Don't push you out because they have a better product or a better service or a sustainable and better price, but they push you out merely because of their size. And they offer a price merely because they can. And they have you accept that price without question because you have no choice. This is not competition. That is straight-out bullying, no different to the caustic actions of the large teenager in a primary school playground. The effects test focuses some way or deals in some way with the causes that have been brought up to us over and over again by small businesses, where they may be small businesses in regional towns, farmers or tenants in a shopping mall. Next is the infrastructure advancement. Every person in this room has in their pockets, and I just heard one, a mobile phone, which is worth a case of beer, by the way, if it goes off. For most of you, it's probably closer to you than your partner will ever be. You will spend more time talking to it than you will spend talking to your husband or your wife. Sadly, some of you will even sleep with it. It has become an essential tool way beyond what was ever envisaged 30 years ago. It's not only your phone, it's also your pocket computer, it's your email, it's your weather, it's your library, it's your teacher. Mobile phone coverage has become essential. So under the Nationals, we have rolled out more than 500 mobile phone towers and upgrades and the funding to support them. We have more to come. We're fixing reception black spots after Labor delivered absolutely nothing in mobile phone coverage. In regards to roads, many people here may be complaining about the traffic in Sydney. Probably, if you live in Sydney, probably more so. In the cities, they complain that the roads are not big enough. In country areas, in some instances, they complain that they just don't exist, or they are not sealed, or that the bridges can't carry the weight to carry the produce. And there is nowhere a better example of this than the village or the area where I grew up, in Danglema, where today, or this week, the road has recently collapsed into the creek. But should we just accept this, as other parties do? People will say the problem is too big, the communities they service are too small, or it's vastly too isolated and costs too much. They ask, why do you need a mobile phone tower at Drake? But the Nationals stand up for these communities, and we fought to secure dedicated funding to fix these problems. We established the Bridges to Renewal program, which has already delivered more than $200 million towards fixing over 240 bridges in the past term. This is in addition to the Roads to Recovery program, which is delivering around $3.2 billion to regional councils for fixing local roads. We're also delivering $700 million for northern roads and for beef roads. We also have to see the infrastructure as enabling the creation of business. We don't determine what that business will be, but we understand if the infrastructure is there, the market will determine what business will grow. And there is more to do. Our nation, over the past 200 years, and the 40,000 years or so before that, have only built 2 sealed roads from east to west. 2 sealed roads in over 200 years. I believe as a nation we have to be better. Today I announce $100 million towards the sealing the remaining 1,700 kilometres of the third east-west route, the Outback Way. The Outback Way is a 2,800 kilometre route that links Laverton in Western Australia with Winton in Queensland, via Alice Springs in the Northern Territory. In 2012, approximately 1,100 kilometres of this road was sealed, with the remaining 1,700 kilometres unsealed or gravel road. We do these things for the people in the remote areas, not for the votes, because there are not many there. We do it for the wealth and the produce that comes from these areas. And we do it as a vision for our nation, delivering wealth for all areas, delivering on the promise that we will be able to drive from Cairns to Perth across the centre of our nation. If roads are the first seed of economic growth, then the second seed of economic growth is as old as civilisation itself. The storage and movement of water. Water is the prerequisite of agricultural activity sine qua non. I'm extremely proud of the work the Nationals have done, bringing this back to the centre of government policy. Water is wealth and a dam is a bank. We have a $2.5 billion plan to build the dams and the pipelines of the future that will deliver affordable water to where it is needed and roll out the plan that has already begun. We have $500 million of grants and the $2 billion of concessional loans that go on top of those grants. Take, for example, the augmentation of Chaffey Dam. When we came to government, it was underfunded, unapproved and unbuilt. Since we have been in government, we have turned the first sod and I opened it last month, and it is filling as we speak. There are water infrastructure projects all around the country that have been thought about, spoken about, studied to various degrees, but we are not the party of philosophers, we are the party of builders. We have announced funding to fast-track 44 water infrastructure projects across the country. Funding will go to water resource assessments, finalising feasibility studies, completing business cases and acquiring the necessary environmental approval. We're providing $60 million for the planning work to get projects around the country ready for construction. We have put $132 million on the table to build Rookwood Weir, which is inland from Rockhampton on the lower Fitzroy River. The 76,000 megalitres of water made available by the Weir will enable an additional $1 billion of agricultural production a year and create 2,100 new full-time jobs in the agricultural sector while providing water security for the centre of Rockhampton. This is what jobs and growth looks like. This is what we meant when we talk about investing in jobs and growth. We're also committed to $20 million to upgrade the McAllister Irrigation District, and this will be also added to by states and farmers. We have added $20 million to the South West Loddon Pipeline, there's another case of beer, to connect remote areas in the Mallee with a reliable water supply. With the Tasmanian government, we are building $120 million of irrigation infrastructure through the $120 million Tasmanian Irrigation Tranche 2 program to bring greater economic future to the rural areas of Tasmania. This is the first time in decades that a government has gone to an election with an ambitious, long-term water infrastructure plan as a centrepiece of its policy. The policy is more than just rhetoric. We have the funds locked away in the budget. We are delivering. Labor's promise is to cut half the water infrastructure fund. Labor's promise is to decimate the vision and the dreams of regional people. The next step of infrastructure is rail. And historically, this obviously is more advanced than water infrastructure, but it is vital. We will continue our development of a corridor of commerce from Melbourne through to Brisbane via the Inland Rail. An opportunity for young families to find a new home and life in Western New South Wales or South West Queensland or regional Victoria, where it is inherently cheaper to set up a business than in the city. We have to connect them to the population so they have a market. We have to connect them to international markets so they have a bright future. We look at what's happened overseas in Texas and the economic benefit that came through delivering advanced rail, and we want to make sure that we do the same. We want that same vision for Dubbo. We want that same vision for Gundawindi. We want that same vision for Ngambie. We want commerce to grow in new areas of our nation. The 1,700-kilometre inland rail will deliver on that vision. We've put real money on the table, $594 million into the ARTC balance sheet so that they can borrow up to $2 billion, which will finalise pre-construction activities such as land acquisitions. On the back of that is the support for people such as Arium, who will produce the steels, the men and women of Australia in other areas, the earth movers, the surveyors, real work, real jobs, real futures. The Inland Rail project is expected to create up to 16,000 direct jobs. The final piece of infrastructure is of the current age, and it is broadband. And you may be thinking, well, he's going into dangerous territory here. Isn't that something that the Green Labor Party Independent Alliance dreamt up? Well, they may have dreamt it, but they didn't come close to delivering it. They may have talked about owning a pony, but we bought the horse, broke it in, saddled it up, and now are riding it. The perfect example of delivery on the NBN is in Tamworth. And when we came into government, we honoured every contractor on the NBN list. And when we had been told that Tamworth was next on the list. But as it turned out, in Tamworth there was not a single contract for construction and no plan for implementation. It was like someone saying you were promised a house. But when you discover, when you investigated, they had no architect, no plans, no bricks, no builders, and ultimately no house. This is what happened with the NBN under Labor. We are now delivering more every month than the Labor delivered in 6 years. Further to this, mobile phone reception and internet speed has long been a handbrake of country communities. In government, we established the Mobile Black Spot program that's already delivering over 500 new and upgraded base stations, which will cover around 3,000 black spots nominated by communities. And we're extending this policy to fix an estimated 4,800 mobile phone black spots. In contrast, Labor has so far committed to the grand sum of just 4 phone towers, and they're all, surprisingly, in one electorate. And we have fast-tracked the New South Wales rollout for regional areas. In April, NBN's Sky Master satellite network was launched to connect regional areas and rural areas to affordable, high-speed broadband. Under the coalition, the NBN will also offer an additional 50 gigabit of data per users per month from the Sky Master satellites for students studying via distant education. Again, under their plan, Labor has forgotten regional Australia. When Labor was in charge of the NBN, the interim satellite service connections were slower than dial-up and plagued by dropout and connection issues. Current reports are getting vastly better outcomes from Sky Master, and we will continue to improve on that plan. Under our plan, by 2020, every home will have access to fast-speed broadband internet. This allows us to deliver business to regional areas. More evidence that what we do, to show that we're not philosophers, we're doers. And a classic example of also our belief in our nation is country of origin labelling. People said it was too hard, it was too parochial, it would never happen, and that what we had was good enough. Well, we changed all that. Australians have long wanted to know exactly where their food is grown and processed. And we have the best produce in the world, and we put so much effort into it, through phytosanitary controls, occupational work health and safety requirements, and supporting our workers. We want to make sure we support local farmers and manufacturers and local businesses as well. People have a right to know. They can buy what they like, but they have the right to know where it came from. The Nationals fought to implement a country of origin labelling system that Australians could trust. We made sure that it was simple, diagrammatic and reflected the proportionality of the Australian produce within it. Likewise, Australians wanted vastly greater controls on who from overseas owned what of their country. The National Party is proud of standing behind the reduction in the Foreign Investment Review Board threshold from 252 million to 15, and have kept the threshold at 0 for state-owned enterprises. We are doing no more than what people have asked of us. We are there to serve them, and this is what they deserve. They deserve for us to respond to their requirements, to their desires. Interestingly, this sentiment seems to be just as strong amongst people in the city as in the country. It is not politically incorrect, nor xenophobic, nor myopic to have a proper control of who owns what in your nation. We will not be embarrassed to stand up for Australia. The most recent Lowy poll reinforces the belief that we have had for a long time. It is funny, but on this topic, the Labor Party has an alternate policy. They want to go in the opposite direction to us, raising the threshold, making it easier to sell out land to somebody from another nation without a question from the FIRB. When we say the Australians have a right to ask questions, they scream back at us, xenophobe. Another example of standing up for the underdog is in the Nationals' representation of owner-operator truck drivers. Mum and dads being put out of business due to a backroom deal between the Labor Party and the Transport Workers Union. Now, I have no problems with unions, but they should not operate at the expense of mum and dads trying to get ahead, spending long hours on the road away from their families, trying to make a buck. In April, Parliament passed legislation to abolish the so-called RSRT, and in doing so supported our mum and dad owner drivers and protected some 60,000 jobs. We have been strategically building the foundations for a stronger regional Australia, building and developing the tangible economic and employment drivers of regional communities. The Agricultural White Paper builds on the foundations for secure regional industries and creates new and better jobs. It delivered new long-term commitments to drought support policy with $2.5 billion over 10 years to concessional loans. When Labor was in power, they abolished the exceptional circumstances and left nothing in its place. This government had to rebuild a national drought policy. Together with Farm Household Allowance, the drought safety net has been significantly improved. The Commonwealth is now the first tier of government to deliver assistance in drought. We have lent over $438 million to over 830 farm businesses. When we came to government, they'd lent out to 8. More than $105 million has been paid out in Farm Household Allowance to support people, to keep dignity in their lives, to make sure they have the capacity to meet at least their groceries when they're doing it tough out west. By putting this in place, the Coalition was able to quickly respond to the crisis in the dairy industry as well, when Murray Goulburn and Fonterra retrospectively cut farmgate prices. We secured a special agricultural commissioner on the ACCC and established an ACCC Agricultural Compliance and Enforcement Unit to better understand the competition issues in agricultural sectors. We stood behind the expansion of the live export trade, even though at some days it gets close to death threats, in fact quite often, securing 7 major new live export destinations and assisting in the negotiation of 3 new free trade agreements, and we won't stop there. Between September 2013 and the 29th of April this year, we've achieved 70 key market access gains and restorations. We have record prices in so many soft commodity lines now that rural exports are the second largest export after iron ore. Record cattle prices, record sheep meat prices, record protein grain prices. I was talking to pork producers the other day in Kingaroy, best prices in 100 years. We've got sugar at 20 cents a pound, $600 a tonne. We have committed $50 billion to long-term strategic infrastructure investments across Australia, which will better connect our regional areas. Passenger, transport and freight links across the country are critical for jobs and economic growth in regional areas. Projects like the $5.6 billion for the Pacific Highway duplication. So hard to deliver, but now often forgotten, but it never happened until we started delivering it ourselves. Or up to the $6.7 billion for the Bruce Highway, and up to the $1.14 billion for the Toowoomba Second Range crossing, and the $220 million to complete the Murray Basin Freight Rail project. We are delivering our $6.2 billion plan to unlock economic growth opportunities across northern Australia, building the roads, building the dams, cutting the red tape, creating a brighter future for the north. Our $1 billion National Stronger Regions Fund is helping regions select what they believe is the infrastructure they need, whether it is a water supply for Werris Creek or a sporting field. We don't talk about creating new or better jobs in Australia, we actually do it. We have a strategic plan to bring high-skilled jobs to the regions through the process of decentralisation to build centres of excellence for the country, in the country. This speech is from one of our nation's most successful decentralisation programs, the City of Canberra. But there are other towns and regional centres that should be afforded the same vision that we've delivered to this marvellous city of Canberra. We do this as a strong Nationals team, part of a responsible coalition government, and at a cabinet table where real decisions are made. We do not serve as commentators or a complaint box like the independent candidates that are nothing more than the front page of the Glee Club, the Green Labor Independent Alliance. They caused chaos. They brought us disastrous policies like the carbon tax, the mining tax, the shutting down the live export industries, and policies that were forced upon regional areas of Australia. Unfortunately, many of these independents and Greens are all running again. The band is back together, offering us the same chaos that was brought to us at the last concert. Julia Gillard, Bob Brown, the memories are still recent. And of course, people understand I'm fighting this in New England. My good colleague Luke Hartsecker is also now challenged in Cowper. But we will deal with this battle and we will play by the rules and we will show to people where the best future, not only for their electorate, but for their nation lies. A similar battle is being waged in the Senate against chaotic independents and micro-parties that feed off the celebrity of an election campaign, but once elected are unaccountable, obstructionists, and do nothing for their communities. We need people like Barry O'Sullivan, Wacker Williams and Bridget McKenzie in the Senate, who have a track record of standing up for regional Australia and getting real results for the little person on the issues that others ignore. So today I think we need to go back to the heart of our values. Who is that person that misses out of core opportunities because they live in regional Australia? Who is it in the family that does not have the opportunities to transcend that social and economic stratification of life as the same family member who grew up in a suburb in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane? Well, it is the student in quest of a tertiary education. We have created a society in which so much requires a tertiary degree. Whether that is right or wrong is another issue. It's the fact. When my father went to Sydney University, only about 6% of people went to university. Nowadays, around 40% of people are going to universities. Therefore, we need to be 7 times more diligent than we had been in the late 1940s. And if that is the main path for progression, then people have to access it. We cannot put a university in every regional town. We cannot put a high school in every corner of our nation. Therefore, we must have the policy settings right so that people get greater access to that ticket to their own future. So today I'm announcing $83 million to reduce the period students need to be employed under the self-supporting criteria from 18 months to 14 months under youth allowance and ab-study living allowance for regional and remote students. This will mean that a student is able to meet the relevant earnings criteria to prove independence with 1 gap year as opposed to having to work for longer and delay their university commencement. The longer a student is not engaged in further studies after university, the less likely it is that they will re-engage. We're also announcing $24 million for 1,200 new rural and regional enterprise scholarships for undergraduates, postgraduates and vocational education students under the STEM studies. A re-elected coalition government will support young Australians living in rural and regional Australia to study and develop new skills in STEM. The scholarships will be valued at up to $20,000 each. We make the promise of, as an election commitment, $44.7 million to increase assistance for the isolated children's additional boarding allowance. This is so important for these families out west. They don't have the high school. Their only option is boarding school, and many of them it is beyond their means to pay for it. We must deliver for these people. A re-elected coalition government will increase by 50% the rate of the additional boarding allowance to bring this assistance more in line with the costs of education for these isolated families. The additional boarding allowance provides a means-tested supplementary payment to provide additional support for low-income families who geographically isolated student boards away from their principal family home. It is enough that these families have to live without their children. As well, we burden them without being able to afford to live without their children. An independent comprehensive review into the equity of education access for rural and regional students is also a further commitment so that we can seek fresh ideas and fresh thinking to bridge this most crucial divide. There is a need for an independent review into regional education to address the clear disparity of achievement, aspiration and access to higher education by regional students. The initiatives announced today are significant steps, but our fight for more equitable access doesn't stop here. We need to look further into the issue to seek fresh ideas and fresh thinking to bridge the divide. We also want students to, if they wish, return to regional areas to work. They must, when they come back, invest in those regional communities to make those communities grow. In so many instances, those who want to get ahead look for grants. As I said, they don't start with the wallet that others had. Now, we prefer to be a government that partners with you rather than gives to you. That's why we provide concessional loans to drought-affected families. That's why we are providing concessional loans to the dairy industry. That's why we are providing concessional loans to state governments for water infrastructure. As a person who has worked in the banking industry and as a former accountant, I believe that the stewardship that you get from lending people money brings inherent disciplines that helps them survive in the many instances beyond the form of a grant. To support our ability to fast-track the delivery of this co-investment, I am pleased to further announce a re-elected coalition government will streamline the Commonwealth financing and concessional loan processing for rural investments by establishing a regional investment corporation. The Regional Investment Corporation will be the single administrator for the $4.5 billion in agricultural and water resources financing and concessional loans initiatives. I have personally seen the benefits government finance corporations can deliver to farmers from my time in the past working for the Queensland Industry Development Corporation. The corporation will administer funds relating to drought concessional loans, the National Water Infrastructure Loan Facility and the loans delivered under drought and drought recovery and farm finance concessional schemes. The corporation will also administer any new financing and concessional loan schemes in my portfolio. There is a clear need for such an entity. We have seen over the past few weeks the sorry potential for states to delay and play politics with the Commonwealth's loan products, as the Victorian Labor government sought to do as it held out on the dairy recovery concessional loans and held us hostage in an attempt to squeeze the federal taxpayer for more administration funding. The Commonwealth should not have to offer drought or other support through the states after the establishment of this Regional Investment Corporation. We will have a vastly more streamlined way to act. In partnership with our Liberal colleagues, we understand that there are very few higher priorities for the Australian people than employment, having a job. The Nationals understand that some regions are doing it tougher than others. Volatile international markets, changing technology and movements in traditional industries cause hardship to specific regions and communities. I see that when I'm in the Bowen Basin. I see that when I'm in the Northern Rivers. I understand this with my colleagues and we need to do more about it. That's why we have a long-term plan to help these communities to strengthen and establish local industries and develop new industries and help people get secure jobs. We're investing in jobs and growth in regional Australia with our jobs packages for regions across our country, including the New South Wales Northern Rivers, the Mid-North Coast, the South Coast, Queensland's Bowen Basin, and also Wide Bay, Fraser Coast and Cairns, and Victoria's Goulburn Valley, and others yet to be announced. We have announced $25 million towards the establishment of the Western New South Wales Integrated Cancer Centre. The Cancer Centre will improve access to cancer treatment for more than 270,000 people who live in Western New South Wales and who will benefit from access to treatments enjoyed by others in the state, whether they're from Newcastle, Sydney or Wollongong. This election gives people in regional areas who by their very nature are so very loyal to their nation a reason to see what we continue to go into bat for. They know what drives our ethos. They know what motivates us to stand. They can see what we are fighting for day in, day out whilst we are here in Canberra. It is the total purpose of the Nationals, undivided and undistracted by other purposes. We fight for this within the coalition. In the alternative to the Labor-Green Independent Alliance, the independents will speak the platitudes without having the discipline. The Labor Party, to be frank, just ignores regional Australia, and the Greens most distinctly, on the majority, work against it. The National Party must have the discipline to work within the government to do their homework so that we have the capacity to realistically fund our core priorities and have the courage to stand up against the sneers and ridicule of many who judge from places generally endowed with so much more of the nation's largesse, or laud their position as parasites on the political discipline required for a secure nation. The whole point of the National Party is to look after regional people. We don't represent the big capital cities. We look after regional seats. We believe that regional people absolutely want the very best outcome for themselves, but they also, and most generally, want a strong nation. We would be proud to continue to serve you, to fight for you, to fight for a fair share for regional Australia. We will continue to fight for the right of Australians to transcend through that social and economic stratification, regardless of where they live. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr Joyce. So, to kick questions off, I would like to ask you about the coalition agreement. You've said that if Malcolm Turnbull is successful at the July 2 poll, you will drive a hard bargain. Can you give us an indication as to what you would like to see in that agreement that is not there now?
No. Thank you very much. Look, it's an actuality. You have to prove to the Governor-General that you have the numbers to govern. And we have a coalition. We have a strong coalition. I've just spent the last day with John Howard. And everybody's always known that at the end there's the expected discussions that you have. This is nothing new. It happens every time. It happens immediately after the election finishes. And if anybody thinks that there won't be a coalition, you're wrong. There will be. There'll be a very strong coalition. But of course, it's part of what we do. The difference between the National Party and the Independents is we do it silently, quietly and effectively. What others do is they bang on about it, scream about it, come up with platitudes about it, but never actually deliver on it.
Colin Beddles.
Colin.
Colin Beddles from Fairfax Agricultural Media. Mr Joyce, thanks for your speech. We've conducted a survey recently of people running farm businesses about how they would vote if an election was held today. A large percentage of those people surveyed are undecided, and the equal number of people who said they would vote either independent or for Labor Party matches the undecided voters. Based on your performance as the Agriculture Minister and the alternative, if there was a change of government, how do you think those people who are undecided should vote?
Well, I hope, Colin, that we have laid out. You can judge us by our form. You can judge us by the fact that you go to any cattle yard and say, how do you reckon we're going? They say, record prices. And they're selling their sheep. They say, how do you reckon we're going? They say, record prices. And you go up to Kingaroy, you go to the pork producers and say, how do you reckon you're going? They say, great prices. If you talk to people with protein crops, whether chickpeas or almonds, say, how are you going? They said, going record prices. If you look at the price of land, they say it's going up. If you look at the infrastructure we're delivering, they said they're building it. It's actually happening. If you talk to them, you'll probably be able to call them on a mobile phone from either our first delivery, our first tranche, or later tranches. What I can say to them is let's think of this logically. If a person who's not aligned with anybody is the right answer for your electorate, then surely they must be the right answer for every electorate. So now let's envisage a world with 150 independents. What we have then, ladies and gentlemen, is total and utter chaos. That's the end of Australia. The Commonwealth will collapse. The way it works, unfortunately, is people understand that if they cheat, if they break the rules, they say, oh, we're so strong that we stand outside the political system. No, they're so weak that they stand outside the order of the nation, and they play from the edges. And because they play from the edges, they claim credit for virtually everything but not responsible for anything. It is not courageous to scream from the coffee shop. It's courageous to get to as close to the centre of the table as possible. And in the heat and fury of the discussions that go on within any political party, to negotiate your way for what is better for your people, knowing full well that the outcome of your discussions is delivery. I don't think there's anything courageous about being the biggest hit in Aussies. It's better to be the biggest hit in Cabinet.
Next question.
What about the potential of Labor returning to the agricultural portfolio?
Colin, let's look at what Labor did last time. You know, Labor did find a saving under the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd Labor Green Independent Alliance. They found a saving. It was in agriculture. When we got the department back, it lost more than half its funding. Biosecurity was at critical level. The funding for biosecurity was lost. It's so important for our nation, biosecurity. It's like an insurance policy. If you don't have it, watch out. They'd cut it to the bone. I wanted to make sure that I work with my team, and I'm incredibly proud of the team we have. And we brought in water into agriculture. We've basically continued to build it up, and fighting all the way through with former Treasurer Joe Hockey to get greater funding to build it up, because we truly believe that this is a pillar of our nation. That if you are walking down Martin Place, you are a farmer, whether you like it or not. If you're walking down Collins Street, you are a farmer, whether you like it or not. If you are walking down Queen Street Mall, you are a farmer, because our nation relies on the income stream that comes from that. It is the mechanism which gives us a buffer to deal with the downturn in the mining industry. Now, we had to build this department up, and I'm incredibly proud of all those people who work in the Department of Agriculture and Water Resources. Now, for one moment, I see myself as some messianic figure, but I'm so proud to be part of that team, that incredible team doing an incredible job. And the Labor Party would do exactly what they did last time. They will decimate it.
Next question from Malcolm Farr.
Malcolm Farr from news.com.au. Thanks for your address, Mr Joyce. A stream of authoritative analysis says that Pauline Hanson might win a seat in the Senate in Queensland. I'd be surprised if you weren't getting similar advice from your people. How aware are you of her policies, should they exist, and where they might coincide or clash with your own? And if there is to be a Senator Hanson, would you be urging Senator Nash to become her second best friend?
Senator Nash is my second best friend. We are not having other second best friends. Look, the people of Queensland, I had the great honour of representing Queensland for 8 years, 7 months and 1 day. And so I understand them, not explicitly, but very well. And the one thing Queenslanders will not take is us lecturing to them. Therefore, what I say to them is just clear analysis. Give me a Barry O'Sullivan any day. Give me a Wacker Williams any day. Give me the brains of Matt Canavan any day. These are the people who have the cut through. These are the people who actually get you what you want. You know, goodness helps anybody who wants to go into a debate against Matthew Canavan. He will tear you to pieces. He has a brain the size of a planet. If you go against the enthusiasm and passion of a person such as Barry O'Sullivan, and to think of who we might lose, Joe Lundgren, a very well-respected Indigenous lady who's done so much to make us all so proud, that her seat will be on the line. I will be doing everything to make sure that Joe Lundgren is re-elected. I think that she challenges all our conceptions and misconceptions about Aboriginal people. A conservative Aboriginal advocate that is held in the highest regard, has never put a foot wrong. Now, Ms Hanson will run her race, and the others will run their race too. But I think that after the fury and the colour, people might quietly just assess what is truly, not only in Queensland's interest, but most importantly, what truly is in our nation's interest. Because remember, so often you are not just voting for your electorate. You are not just voting for your senator. You are voting for the nation of Australia. You have a responsibility to the nation of Australia, just like all those men and women who have served our nation. Why do they do it? Because they believe in this nation. They believe in this nation. So vote for your senator, vote for your electorate, but first and foremost, vote for your nation.
Next question from Michelle Grattan.
Michelle Grattan, The Conversation. Mr Joyce, can I ask you about the ministry if the coalition is re-elected? Will you definitely stay in your present portfolio? And also, you've spoken a lot about trade. Why have you given up, or why have the Nationals given up on trying to get the trade portfolio, which used to be a jewel in their crown? Sure.
Look, we asked Malcolm for every cabinet position, but he wasn't really keen on the idea. Michelle, I'll be quite frank. A lot of the times with trade, you spend outside the country. The trade minister is a rarely seen thing. It's incredibly important, and as the leader of the party, I have a lot of work to do within the nation. It was really, in discussions with Fiona and others, it was a practical decision. We have an agenda, and our agenda is for the tactile delivery and for the real turnaround in prices. The tactile delivery of real infrastructure and the real delivery of better commodity prices, and we are doing that. In any other deliberations in regards to future reshuffles, that's called getting way ahead of yourself. Because the first thing you've got to do before that happens is only a minor issue. It's called winning an election. Otherwise, you'll be organising who the shadow ministers, and that's a very dour conversation.
Paul Osborne.
Paul Osborne from AAP. Thank you very much for your speech. What's your message to coalition voters who fear that the small government focus of the coalition, particularly of the Abbott government, has now been abandoned? I'm talking about things like reducing the size of the bureaucracy, outsourcing things to the private sector that they can do better and cheaper, and real tax reform. And just on a second issue, do you think the Regional Investment Corporation would be really well based in Tamworth?
I could try. No, let's get the thing bedded down in Canberra. The issue is this, that we are in a process of decentralisation. We've done it with Riddick to Wagga, with GRDC up to Toowoomba, with fisheries across to Adelaide. We've done it in the past with the Antarctic Division down to Hobart, and APVMA, of course, we've announced that going to Armidale. The whole purpose is to, if we spread the largesse more evenly around the nation, then there's a greater benefit from it. This city here is a wonderful city. But just to give you an example, there's more money going to be spent in the upgrade of Parliament House than there would be in moving one of those departments, the APVMA. So the money, the support of this city is incredible, and so it should be, and so it will continue. But we've got to have that in other parts of the nation as well. In regards to business, we're always working at how, and we continue on with our red tape reduction program. We're always looking at ways that we can further reduce, and we're doing it within our own Department of Agriculture. We can further reduce overheads. And when you talk about big government, I'll give you a classic example of where we push back. If you vote for the Green Labor Party Independent Alliance, whatever form it takes, wherever it suits you, one of the things they're promising is a federal tree clearing police. This is the ultimate sort of Kafkaesque stand of a further bureaucrat literally on your private property to determine what trees you can touch and what trees you can't, to determine it on a private asset that you are paying the bank back for, that you're paying the rates for, that you're paying the public liability insurance for. We stand against that. We say it's your private asset. The government, as much as possible, should stay away from private assets. And we don't want them in our living rooms, we don't want them in our bathrooms, and we don't want them on our property. Another classic example is they'll go further with animal welfare measures, the Labor Green Independent Alliance, which will mean, and they'll start to mimic some of the aspects of what happens overseas, for instance, the movement of cattle, which may be perfectly in order for Europe, where everything's 5 minutes away from one another, but it's not when you live in a place such as Australia. I have always been pushed in the live cattle industry for further regulation. We're always pushing back. So we're living the ethos of smaller government.
So just on a specific, why not privatise the payment system of Medicare if it's more efficient and gets government out the way and gives taxpayers a better deal?
Well, no, what the whole Medicare thing, and I knew, I was waiting for where it was going to come up. And you've just taken that question, and that question. This is amazing. I've seen some amazing things in politics, but the discussion about the privatisation of Medicare just takes the cake. I mean, why don't we say, we say that the Labor Party will cut the Sydney Harbour Bridge in two and move it to Tamworth, and we're going to stop it. It's also just a load of garbage. It's just made up. I mean, if their campaign has got to the point now where they're literally making up stories and then fighting against them, then we should all just get a packet of chips and sit down and watch them and just get to the end as quickly as possible. This is so absurd, and I look at poor old Mr. Shorten and thinking, mate, you got to back yourself out of this one. And he's just looking more earnestly and dopier at the camera. It's just got to come. And it was going to come to a grinding end in about 10 days' time. But look, in any of these things, we are not going to feed their metaphor, because whatever they do, when they start these lies, we're not going to feed them in any way, shape or form. So what they actually do is they just create chaos, which is their metaphor. We're always trying to do things more efficiently, but we're not touching anything in Medicare.
Next question from Peter Jean.
Peter Jean from The Advertiser, Mr. Joyce. Just on foreign investment, your argument that Australians should have a veto over whether prime agricultural land is sold to foreigners really resonates with the public. But how do you answer your critics on things like the proposed sale of Kidman, that sometimes the capital just isn't here in Australia and we need that foreign investment in farms in order for the agricultural sector to expand?
I'm glad you asked me that question. Look, let's go into two things. One of the things they say, there's not enough investment in the land. All the regulatory requirements which were asked prior is because people believe we've had too much investment. Tree clearing guidelines, we've knocked over too many trees. Water, we're buying it back because we've given out too much, and South Australia will be very aware of that. This idea that we haven't got investment in land is just bumpkin. Go out and have a look at it. We've had a massive investment. Over Section 75B, water reticulation deductions, and what happened around Gundawindi and St George. Massive investment. Massive investment out there. People do find the capital. We have $2 trillion. $2 trillion in our nation in super funds. Not one fund has more than 1% of its portfolio, the major ones, well, 1% of its portfolio invested in agriculture. Invested in agriculture. This is, I think, overall, it's about 0.5%. So let's not say we don't have access to capital. We do. And we're not asking for much to invest in one of the fastest growing industries in Australia with record prices. I find it surprising, and we're never going to run out of foreign investors. We have them lined up, as I said, they're out the door, down the street, over the hills and far away. They're all lined up, they're all ready to pay their price to have a punt at buying further of our assets. And I understand that. It's a great investment. We have a protein deficit in the world. The world is looking for protein. Their standard of living is increasing, their buying capacity is increasing, and they're searching for protein. And guess one of the greatest venues for the production of that protein? Here, our nation, our nation. And you can see it. If it walks, and if it's not human, somebody around the world wants to eat it. and it's the same thing. It's the same thing with grains. Anything that's protein grains, we can sell it. Chickpeas, flavour beans, navy beans, almonds. And so this investment, prudent investment by our super funds, by our asset managers, must reach out and say, hey, let's get involved with this ourselves. So that the person walking down Martin Place and turning the corner into Pitt Street says, actually, I own a little bit of this. I've got a little bit of this action. I'm part of this. And they should demand it of their own super funds. And the person who's walking down Collins Street can ask the same question. I want a part of this action. I want my super fund to invest in my nation so that I can get the returns that farmers are getting. I say to cattle producers now, if you cannot make money now, get out. It's never going to get... this is about as good as it gets. And so why don't all of you have a bite of that action?
Next question from Sid Ma.
Sid Ma from The Australian, Mr Joyce. I'm just a bit interested. Could you tell us a bit more about this Regional Investment Corporation? Will the assets be held on budget or off budget? Will it have the same modelling as the Clean Energy Finance Corporation? Will it be required to have a return above the bank bill rate? Sure. Tell us how it works.
Well, we've just announced it today. We'll start the construction of it ASAP as soon as we get back. See, it's not going to be such a quantum leap. I know you're basically sort of going into the tabulated data of it all. We're doing it already in ways which we do with concessional loans, where we actually do get it. We cover our costs and look for a minor return on the money that we're lending out at the moment, Sid. So this is not such a major leap. And the alternative, Sid, for many instances is when a crisis comes, is to give people money. Now, the nation gets no return on that. I'll tell you what the return is on giving people money. Zero. The return on giving people money is a grant. That's it. And where the money goes, who knows? Where the $900 cheques went under Labor, who knows? So we want to be partners in this scheme. And just like everything, just like the Queensland Industry Development Corporation, you work on the terms that has a mandate for the economic development, for taking over the facilities that are currently there and operating in a myriad of places, and trying to get it more streamlined and more organised and in a more cogent form. I don't think there should be no crime in trying to make sure that the processes that are currently in place in a myriad of buckets are placed together for a more cogent outcome.
Phil Curry.
G'day, Mr Joyce. Phil Curry from the Financial Review. Look, Labor's witnessed firsthand in this election campaign what happens when you put big business offside with their opposition to the tax cuts. It's attracted the ad campaign and rather hostile response. One of your first things you're going to have to do if you win the election is get the effects test through Cabinet. That's vehemently opposed by the big fellas, the BCA, Coles, Woolworths, groups like that. What's your message to them if they're thinking of coming at you after the election?
It's a decision that's made by Cabinet. It's policy of the coalition. It's going forward. It's really. Yeah, well, the legislation is really a question for others, because you're not going to have any problems within the National Party and the Liberal Party. I mean, if others, the Labor Party, decide that they're going to stand against the effects test, well, I look forward to having that battle with them on for all the chamber. That will be a remarkable turnaround.
Are you worried the Senate could be worse?
Look, I have enough trouble predicting the weather. I'm not going to start with the Senate, but you know, but let's hope that we get. Let's hope the Australian people give us a Senate that we can work with.
David Shiraz.